Good evening and welcome to the Flip Classroom for AP US History. This is going to be our first go around at this. Hopefully it works and gives you a little bit of extra help and extra resources understanding what's in the text and so forth. Okay, so in class, hopefully, I'm recording this on Thursday, so I'm not sure how far we'll get tomorrow, but hopefully we got through the Boston Tea Party and the Tea Act, which you can see in the map or in the video here. Which is actually at night, so it's not the most accurate picture, but you see Mohawk Indians, colonists dressed up as them, destroying the tea, throwing it into the harbor in response to the Tea Act, which placed a monopoly on the tea from the East India Company that the British East India Company was selling in the colonies. And the colonists were upset. They were forced to land this, forced to pay a small tariff for the tax. So they gathered together and basically destroyed it. Which obviously upset the colonists or the British and did a lot of damage to Boston Harbor as well. So because of the Tea Party, Congress passes, or the Parliament passes, the Intolerable or the Coercive Acts. Okay, the British call them the Coercive Acts, all right, because when we coerce someone, we are forcing them to obey or forcing them to support something. Coercive would be a great word for the word wall. So for 5 extra points for the first person to put that word on the wall on Tuesday morning. The British colonists called them the Intolerable Acts because they could not tolerate them. Okay, essentially what these did was they closed Boston Harbor. All right, so the merchants were obviously shut down from their livelihood. They could no longer do any business out of the harbor until the tea was paid for, which the colonists obviously refused to do because they denied doing it because it was the Mohawk Indians. All right. It also shut down the Massachusetts Assembly, which is the democratically elected body to represent the citizens of Massachusetts. All right, they had a local assembly that governed the colony, and that was shut down. So they essentially put them under martial law under a guy by the name of Thomas Gage, who was a British officer in charge of Boston, essentially punishing them for what happened. So the colonists get together and call for a Continental Congress to have the colonies meet to talk about the Coercive Acts to try and have something done. Okay, 12 of the 13 states show up to meet, and this is significant because for the first time the colonists are going to get together and talk. They are realizing we are not just 13 separate colonies; we are one group. All right, the one that does not attend is Georgia, because Georgia, basically being that buffer against the Indians, kind of like being with Britain, they wanted British protection. That'll quickly change, but initially they were not buying into any kind of resistance to Britain. All right, and you probably know some of the notables that attended. You had Sam Adams, you had John Adams, Ben Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. This is where these founding fathers are finally getting together for the first time to discuss possible revolution. Okay, we'll get into this a little bit more in class, but essentially, from that Continental Congress meeting in 1774 up until April of 1775, the British, or the colonists, are trying to work with the British and have the British go back to the way things used to be. They wanted to return to 1763, before any taxes, before any proclamation lines, before any rule by the British was passed down onto the colonists. Okay, so what happens in April of 1775? Is the colonists are meeting out in the towns of Lexington and Concord, out in the Massachusetts countryside. And the British, under General Gage, get word of this, that they're stockpiling weapons, and they're kind of meeting in secrecy. Remember, this was outlawed under the Intolerable Acts. So the British march, okay, by sea. All right, they take the boats out of Boston, which is right here, and they take some boats down this river and march out to Lexington and then to Concord. Okay, you all know the story of Paul Revere. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. It's a very famous poem. However, you see Paul Revere gets arrested, but he happened to have a name that rhymed, and that's why the poem kind of brought him fame. At Lexington and Concord, shots ring out. I'm going to talk about this in class. There are people are killed in Concord, British soldiers. 3 British soldiers die here. That has basically started the war. Okay, there's no movement of independence, but there is conflict between the British and the colonists for the first time. Okay, so the British basically are going to suppress this rebellion and this resistance that's going on. And the colonists are just trying to work with the king. They meet a second time in Philadelphia to discuss the problems and justify what they did to the king. Okay, they killed the king's soldiers. This is King George III of the British. And the colonists are going to meet in Philadelphia to discuss what they're going to do about this. They've killed the king's soldiers. They're in open rebellion. What are they going to do? All right. And while they're meeting there in Philadelphia, trying to discuss what they're going to do, they actually come up with something called an olive branch petition, which is a reach out to the king to basically ask for forgiveness. All right, we extend our hand to you. We want you to forgive us. We want to go back to the way things used to be. The king shoots it down. It does not pass. Okay, and the colonists are kind of left fighting this war. In 1776, Thomas Paine, or T-Paine, as some of you rappers like to say, publishes something called Common Sense. We were going to read this in the first part of class on Tuesday, and basically he's arguing for a dissolution of the alliance with the king. He says, use your common sense. This doesn't make any sense. Why should we be ruled by a king 3,000 miles away? This is a pamphlet that essentially puts the idea of independence into the hands of the commoners, the common citizens, who are going to be the ones that are going to have to fight this revolution. All right? Now, you read the Declaration over the weekend, all right, and we're going to discuss it on Tuesday. We want to get into the teeth of the document and realize, are these good arguments? Are these valid reasons that they are presenting to the king for their independence? Okay? So, first, in June of 1776, now we've been fighting for 14 months since Lexington and Concord against the British, okay? And the Continental Congress is debating back and forth what they're going to do. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia stands up and says, I propose that these colonies are of right, free and independent states. He basically says, let's vote to break this alliance with England and declare independence. All right, so the colonies say, all right, we're good, but we need to draft something, okay? So they put a committee together, all right? Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, John Adams are on the committee. They agree Jefferson should write it. So Jefferson spends the month of June locked up in an office in Philadelphia, writing over and over again the Declaration of Independence. He submits that on July 2nd to the Continental Congress. It is approved. John Adams says July 2nd will forever be a day of celebration and honor of our country, and picnics and fireworks and joy in honor of our nation's independence. Was John Adams right? Kind of. Had the day off a little bit. All right, because they are going to approve the idea of independence, but they have to edit it. So on July 3rd, they go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and good old poor Thomas Jefferson has his declaration torn apart with the red pen, like your teachers do after you write your DBQs. Just kidding. All right, and the biggest thing that they take out on July 3rd is a provision condemning the slave trade. Thomas Jefferson blames the king for the slave trade, and the Southern delegates at this Continental Congress don't want to sign on to something condemning the slave trade. They kind of like it. All right. So on July 4th, the Second Continental Congress approves the final draft, and one person signs it on July 4th. You might know his name of John. I'm spelling this terrible here. All right, John Hancock writes his famous signature, and the declaration is passed. It's actually not till August 2nd when it's actually signed by everybody else. But Hancock puts his John Hancock on it. Sorry for the bad drawing. I'm actually going to erase this because this is embarrassing. But he signs his signature to it, declaring our independence. All right, so go ahead and read the document. I'm also going to put a video up of some actors reading the document to you. And the reason I'm doing that is because when they wrote this, when it was finally passed on July 2nd, the intention was for it to be read in a public square for all of the people to hear it. Because remember, a lot of people couldn't read back then. They wanted it to be heard from the voices of the people throughout the colonies. Okay? So let's have a great discussion on Tuesday. Read through the document. Focus on the natural rights and the list of grievances. This is the promise to our country of what we're going to get should we win our independence from England. All right, hope this worked out, and we'll talk on Tuesday.